Hello and welcome back to the Warwick F1 Show for another week. This week we are looking back at the Belgium Grand Prix that took place last week in Spa-Francorchamps. A race that had one driver cross the line in first place, but another driver win it. Both from the same team, George Russell taking the checkered flag first, but eventually being disqualified. His car was underweight by 1.5 kilos, and that gave his teammate Lewis Hamilton his 105th win in Formula One. Behind him, Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc made up the podium. In fourth place, we had Verstappen recovering from his engine penalty, which dropped him to 11th at the start of the race. And then behind Verstappen, we had Norris not quite capitalising on the penalty that Verstappen had and dropping more points in the championship battle. We also had Sergio Perez, who had a much better Saturday, maybe not as good of a Sunday as he was hoping, and lots of other drivers beside that. I'm joined today by Callum and James, and as ever, we'll start off by going through what we think about the race out of 10. So yeah, I'll come to you, James. First, what are you kind of giving that race out of 10?
Say 8. It was a pretty thrilling race. We had a great. It was quite good to see the all mixed up how amazingly close it is at the moment. And then it was thrilling towards the end with Hamilton chasing down Russell and Piastri gaining on them. Possibly takes a shine off a little bit that the result was changed like 2 hours later, but.
Yeah, I mean, Callum, do you agree with that? Go 8 out of 10?
I'm not too sure, actually. I think I probably went with a lot of a lower rating, to be honest, compared to 8. I was thinking more of a 6 or 7. I think ultimately there wasn't much action that I could remember on track apart from the last kind of few laps with the last lap battles between obviously the two Mercedes and the McLaren. And even in terms of strategy, there wasn't, I don't think, much in the way of variation. The only real variation we got was from Russell attempting the one stop and a couple of others, and obviously Russell got disqualified at the end. So I think overall, it definitely wasn't the most exciting race that we've seen this season. So I'd probably go for around a 6 or a 7.
Yeah, I think I'd probably go for about a 7 as well. I think it was one where, like we've seen with a lot of races this season, it was a bit more of a slow burner from the start, but then once we get into it, and I think increasingly as we began to realize that George Russell actually has a chance of winning this. I think obviously everyone didn't think the one-stop strategy would work. I know personally I didn't think it would go anywhere near the end, and then you kind of got with 6 laps to go, 5 laps to go, you're like, oh wait, Hamilton isn't closing as fast on Russell as maybe he should, and even if he closes on him, he's still got to overtake. And I think that just made the race a lot more exciting at the end. And I think we've seen that a lot this season. It really is coming down to that final lap, those final few laps, when a driver in first and a driver in second are kind of getting a bit closer and do kind of set up for a win. I mean, James, I'll come to you first. I personally, as I've said, didn't think that the one-stop strategy would get anywhere near close to working. I mean, was that the same for you? Were you kind of expecting Russell to hold up?
I was surprised. I was just presuming Hamilton would breeze past. I was originally thinking he'd probably end up 8th, actually. Probably get past him, he'd end up 8th, staying out on the one-stop. It was a gamble, but he'd probably end up 8th. There was only really a few laps to go. So, hold on, Russell could actually win this. Hamilton's still not got him. Surely Russell couldn't actually win this, could he? And then when I was still kind of thinking Hamilton would probably get past. And then he got to when he gets to the penultimate lap, and can Hamilton make the move this time? And no, he doesn't. I think is he going to get in next time round? It's probably 50-50 on the final lap. He didn't. And Russell took a flag, but not the win.
Yeah, I mean, it was just he was the only driver, obviously, in the top 8 to try the strategy. I think it was one where Russell very much made his own choice to to go for the one stop. And it was just like, you saw it. And I mean, it was a good risk to take because it would have probably resulted in, I think he was running fifth. He would have been fifth on the road. So he would have, if he'd pit again, he probably would have come fifth or sixth. But then you start seeing it and it starts going, oh, Verstappen and Norris might not catch him, and then Leclerc might not catch him, and then Hamilton and Piastri might not catch him. And obviously he does finish first on the road. I mean, Callum, what were your kind of thoughts on it? Were you as kind of surprised as anyone to see him A, go for the strategy, and then B, we can say it worked out, and then obviously we'll come into what happened a bit after.
Yeah, I was surprised really that Mercedes were actually where they were. I think really it took me by surprise. I was not expecting Mercedes to be as dominant as they were. I certainly thought it was going to go into the hands of more McLaren with Red Bull being out of the running. And so I was very surprised to see Mercedes dominate. Certainly wasn't expecting a 1-2 before the penalty was actually added, or the disqualification was added to Russell. Very unfortunate for him. I think he's been very unfortunate throughout a lot of races this season, especially, the qualifying, I think it was in Spain, and now this. He's been let down by his team quite a lot this season, and I think he's been an absolutely phenomenal driver this season and would have definitely gotten a lot more results had it not been for these instances that happen without him. But the Mercedes were really strong this race, and I think maybe for Russell it was more a kind of reaction or being reactive with the one stop rather than proactive. They definitely didn't plan that from the start. They perhaps thought it was a good idea, or maybe the best shot they had with the position that they were in around lap 20 to 30, and they're just, I guess, some could say lucky, but some could say good strategy that it actually pulled off, that they actually worked out for them in the end. And again, just a real shame about that disqualification.
Yeah, got to come on to kind of the disqualification now. So we obviously see Russell come over the line and first make it a 1-2 for Mercedes, but then a few hours later we find out that his car is 1.5 kilos underweight. And with this being a technical regulation, it is very much a kind of slam dunk thing. We think back to Austin last year with Hamilton and Leclerc when their planks were too thin. This isn't a sort of thing that is like has shades of grey. It's very black and white in terms of disqualification. And then obviously once we heard the news about half an hour later, we did find out that Russell had been disqualified, and I think Mercedes have said there were a combination of factors: the lack of tyre wear, not the lack of the increased tyre wear from running a one stop. Obviously, those hard tyres going about 17 laps longer than all the others, losing rubber, as well as that. We had Mercedes has said there was increased kind of floor wear, although it was still within the regulations, and then also Russell exerting, sweating and losing a lot more body weight than I think they expect. And James, I'm a Hamilton fan. Obviously, I'm happy with the Hamilton win, but I was still disappointed when I saw Russell get disqualified. Because you don't want to see.
You don't like to see the result of a race changed hours later.
Yeah,
last time that happened was 16 years ago, and that was Hamilton losing a win at Spa.
Yeah, and do you think that maybe this was on Mercedes? Do you think that they should have probably thought about that, or is this just something that kind of happens? It's just a bit of luck of the draw, and in this case, it didn't work out.
I think it was Mercedes' error. They should have put more ballast on. Because Aston Martin ran a one stop on both cars, and they didn't have any problem with tyre. They didn't have any problems with failing scrutiny. They were both in compliance. And the plank wear and the sweat is the same for everyone. So.
Yeah, and Callum as well. Is this on Mercedes? Is it on the driver? Should they have predicted this? Should they not have? Is it just kind of an unfortunate error? It is just luck with the draw. And again, for Russell, is quite unlucky because this is now definitely one of the win that he lost, and potentially the second win that he could have lost over the last few races, and it has almost felt like he's won the one he got lucky to win one, but has now got unlucky to lose two.
Yeah, I think it's not really unlucky from Russell, to be honest, or from Mercedes, because it's not very often that you hear of a team being disqualified and having these problems in qualifying, and really not something you expect from a team like Mercedes, which we know is capable of consistently winning and performing race in, race out across a season. And so I think it's really just it baffled me, honestly, to see Mercedes making what ultimately I don't want to say kind of rookie mistakes, but it's something that's unprecedented, certainly, as I said, from a team like Mercedes, and it's certainly not something that they're going to want to see, especially after they've thrown away what is ultimately a 1-2, a huge result from what they've had this season. To come from where they were this season, at the start of the season, we were saying that Mercedes were nowhere. We were criticising them. They were looking at being ultimately the fourth, maybe even fifth place team, and they've brought it back to being able to lead the pack consistently, maybe. And so for their championship hopes, it's going to ultimately throw away 18 points, and that's going to be just... It's going to be a huge disappointment for them, and something that they're going to look to patch up very quickly, I would say.
Yeah, and obviously they will try and move on from that, trying to recover some of those points over the next few races. So we'll drop to some of the teams behind Mercedes at this race. And I think it's probably fair to talk about McLaren and Red Bull kind of at the same time, a race where neither of the kind of two teams had the one that they wanted. We can start, I think, with Red Bull. I think, James, it's fair to say that Verstappen probably would have won that race had he not had his engine penalty. Obviously, he was so dominant in qualifying. But for me, I think the disappointing driver out of the Red Bulls was Sergio Perez. With his teammate obviously having that penalty, he's in a prime opportunity, starting in second place ahead of everyone except Charles Leclerc. And realistically, that you'd think that Red Bull was faster than the Ferrari, starting ahead of everyone. He's looking at good points, and then he's the final finisher out of all of the top eight, obviously before Russell's retirement. And obviously we have seen the news over the last few days. It looks as though Red Bull are going to be keeping Perez, perhaps with some influence from Liberty, maybe against the wishes of the Red Bull outfit. And I mean, do you think that this performance at Belgium, at Spa, perhaps shows why Red Bull did want to get rid of him, and maybe this is against their wishes a little bit that they are keeping him?
Yeah. Well, yes, it was not a good performance. I mean, Perez normally moves forward, normally qualifies badly and moves forward as a race goes on. Even with Perez's struggles, it's rare to see him just go backwards in a race. And the fact he slipped from second on the grid, just went backwards through the race down to 8th on the road, which became seventh after Russell's disqualification. It's good. Yeah, he's probably rather fortunate to being kept on, partly because Red Bull had no viable alternatives. Christian Horner seems opposed to bringing in Tsunoda. Ricciardo's not quite shown enough yet to show he's ready to go back to Red Bull, and Lawson's too inexperienced, so there wasn't really a viable alternative, which has helped Perez here. In terms of his race, the strategy was, because I don't think Red Bull's strategy was the best. That medium hard was not the best strategy, because the medium tire was not good. The hard was much better, and Verstappen, and yeah, I don't know if they could have done anything more with Verstappen, like pitted him later to try and get ahead. All that didn't really work with Norris.
This is exactly the type of race that you need Perez. So I think this was, we said before the race in our kind of preview that this was going to be a major race for Perez, and one that he needed to deliver to show his worth to the team. And it couldn't have, although it wasn't, he didn't crash out in tremendous fashion, it's still not a very good race for him at the end of the day, losing 5 places, what would have been 6th if Russell had not been disqualified. So, as James said, I think the reason for keeping Perez is more because that there's a lack of options in the driver market, rather than actually wanting to keep him, actually that he has performed enough.
Yeah, and I think as well, I've kind of expressed my thoughts on Perez a little bit over the last few weeks. And
a little bit would be an understatement, I must say.
I think this is worse. This is worse than him qualifying in 15th or 14th and coming through the field. He did it. He did what he should be doing. He qualified 2nd. He was just off pole position, obviously after Verstappen's penalty. And then he just drops back. Like, there's no pace there. He drops behind both the Ferraris, who aren't, I don't think, weren't especially good. He drops behind his teammate, who started in 11th, behind both Mercedes, behind both McLarens. And they are going with this decision to keep him. I'm willing to be 100% sure on this that Red Bull will lose the Constructors' Championship. I think that McLaren will always have one driver up there, at least, if not 2, realistically, if the drivers do start to get a bit better at like being more consistent, especially maybe Norris, and obviously we'll come on to that in a second. But Red Bull are gonna lose. The gap's down to 40 points. We've got about, I think it's 10 or 9 races left. That's not a big margin. If Perez is going to consistently be coming 8th or 7th and only picking up 4 or 6 points, Verstappen's a brilliant driver, don't get me wrong, and will on some weekends make up that difference. But it only takes one weekend where Verstappen is 4th, like we saw here, where he's 3rd behind a 1-2 for McLaren, and the gap is wiped out.
As I said, I think with the decision to keep Perez now, because realistically I don't think they're going to drop him anywhere else in the season apart from the summer break. I think now the championship is in McLaren's hands, ultimately.
I mean, it nearly could have been even worse for Perez at the weekend, because he only yes, he got that 2nd on the grid, but he only scraped through into Q3 by 0.003 of a second. From being knocked out. Otherwise, he would have been down in 11th, and it would have gone even worse. And then he probably would have been 7th at best, because he'd have gone backwards further. And has scored, wouldn't have played any role at the front. In terms of the rest of the season, I mean, there's some talk Red Bull could reconsider their decision after Singapore. There's another 4-week gap after Singapore. The next 4 races time, obviously it's Baku and Singapore in that time, which traditionally Perez's strong tracks, particularly Baku. It's won twice before, most of anyone there, but to see, because at the rate McLaren have been outscoring Red Bull from Imola onwards, then McLaren would take the lead in the Constructors' Championship with 5 rounds to go.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, if Perez went out in Q3, it would be quite funny if Perez qualified normally and still came out behind Verstappen with a 10-place grid penalty or whatever it was. I think that would be maybe the last straw. But yeah, like James, like you said, McLaren have been very strong, and I think it's lucky from Red Bull in a way that Verstappen was quite dominant near the start of the season. We're thinking of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. And a bit like probably at the start of the season, we were thinking, it's going to kick off and be exactly like 2023, but it hasn't happened. So it's going to be a very interesting second half of the season, and Red Bull are in a very precarious position, one which they have not had to experience in the last 2 or 3 seasons, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, Perez at this point is only saving grace is the street circuits. I think if he comes out of them without points, there is zero reason for him to be in that car. And I mean, like, and we talk about if he qualified 11th, but then he would have probably still finished 7th. It's the same result regardless of where he qualifies. He's just not performing in the race, and I think that is the main problem because qualifying ultimately doesn't win you points. It is the race that does that. And I guess now we've been mentioning it, we will move on to McLaren. I think fair to say a race of two sides for their drivers. I think you've got Piastri, who, to be fair to him, is looking incredibly consistent at the moment. Obviously took that win a few weeks ago in Hungary. If he'd not made that mild mistake, I think with the pit stop, shout out to that pit stop guy, by the way, who did just take the full weight of an F1 car to his chest and still managed to get the jack underneath it. But if Piastri hadn't made that mistake, perhaps he would have competed with the Mercedes for the win. I think obviously overtaking at Belgium and especially overtaking Lewis Hamilton would have been very difficult. But then you've got his teammate Lando Norris, and this was a prime opportunity for him to make up points on Verstappen with his penalty, and he comes out of it again with a mistake on that one again, and then again drops points to Verstappen. And I think, I don't know about you guys, but I think Norris just looked out of sorts all weekend. He never really looked like capitalizing. And then when he went off into the gravel on lap 1, that was basically his race done.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when the field's so close as it is now, just the smallest error can still have big consequences. Yeah, I mean, Norris hasn't been the most consistent at times. Just like little things here and there. His starts have not been good recently. But yeah, it's a shame he just dipped that wheel a bit wide on the start. We dropped him wrapped up the exit in the source. We dropped him down to 7th, and from there it was always going to be difficult to come through. The captain's strategy probably didn't help him either. And so the field was so close. McLaren didn't nail qualifying in the rain, partly because the car was set up for the dry. Could Piastri have won the race if it wasn't for that pit stop? It wasn't for overshooting the pit box. I mean, how far was he? He was, when it cost him 2 seconds overshooting the pit box, and he came out. How close was the gap at the end? It wasn't much at all. He was only.
I think it was 0.7 to Hamilton, but obviously overtaking.
Yeah.
And catching of two very different
about
things.
6/10 of a second behind. Whether he would have been able to pass, we don't know, but we don't really know. But we'll have ultimately we'll never know that. Also, with the threat of Piastri, with Mercedes to swap their drivers around, with Piastri coming up, Piastri's closer.
I think ultimately Norris is going to be very disappointed to only have one race win at this point in the season. It sounds very odd to say that. I'm sure if you asked him last season, Norris said he had one race win, he'd be chuffed to bits. But this season, I should say, is completely different. The amount of times that their car has been very dominant over the field, and I guess you could maybe argue that this race wasn't exactly like that. I think we've certainly had other races this season where Norris will be more disappointed that he couldn't capitalise and get the full points, but certainly you've got to think that he would be disappointed and would want to be more up there compared to this race. I think it's, and especially as well what we've just talked about with Perez dropping points, it would be the perfect opportunity to get it really within kind of a race win's worth of points, or just a little bit more in terms of the gap between Red Bull and McLaren going into the summer break. That would be a perfect position for them. And not that they're in a bad position, they're certainly still in a good position. Like we just said, we think that the championship will be in McLaren's hands now in order to win. But I think ultimately Norris is going to be very disappointed with how he's performed. He's had a lot of those lap one, turn one incidents that he should have capitalised on, he should have done better on. And we know that sometimes just those little mistakes can cost you dearly, especially if you're fighting for race wins. And so I do hope that Norris is able to change this in his racecraft and just clean out those small mistakes, because if he can do that, he could really be on for lots of different race wins in the second half of the season. But I think he has to do that before he's able to get on this on this kind of consistent race winning. But also credit to Piastri. I think he's exceeded Norris in the last few races, and he's gone above and beyond, I'd say, what we expect. Probably he's gone to the levels that probably we expect Norris should be at, and that's from a driver who is only in his second season in Formula One. It's absolutely incredible. And so, as we said, a tale of two sides of the garage, but ultimately I think McLaren will take away positives and negatives, and it's their momentum going into the second half of the season.
Well, no, that's exactly what I was going to say about Piastri. I've just been looking back at the last few races, and I think of 4 of the last 6, probably extending back to Monaco, Piastri has been in with a chance of winning. He came second in Monaco, obviously qualified second, and we all know how difficult it is to overtake there. Then into Austria, he was very close to Russell right at the end. I think if they'd had a few more laps there, I think you would have seen a battle for the win. Obviously in Britain, he had those issues in the rain. I think poor strategy on McLaren's side kind of scuppered his chances there, but was running very quick at the end. Obviously did win in Hungary, and again here in Belgium, right up there with the Mercedes. And I think for a driver who, as you say, Callum, is only in his second season in F1 and did have quite a tough start, I think, to this season, still trying to get on top of kind of tyre wear and things like that. He's come on leaps and bounds over the past few weeks and past few races, and I think it's exactly what McLaren need if they do want to win the constructors title. And I do think that I'm not saying it will happen now. I'm not saying it will happen anytime soon. But if you maybe get into the latter stages of this year, and I think especially next year, if we do have it as close as it currently is into 2025, I think McLaren need to ask questions about if these current trends continue, as they have done over the past few races, I think McLaren potentially need to ask questions about whether they do want a number 1, number 2 strategy, or will they kind of let the drivers be equal? Because I think at the moment, Piastri is putting in the performances that warrant him being seen as equal to Norris in that team.
Piastri would probably have won in Austria, but not for having that time deleted in quali for exceeding track limits.
Yeah, exactly.
He turned on the grid otherwise, and given he from 7th on the grid, he only would have been ahead of Russell on the grid, and given Russell only beat him by 2 seconds in the end, surely he would have got his maiden win then. I mean, no, it's not to say Norris hasn't been unlucky this season. He has. I mean, the strategy in Canada, McLaren got one. He should have won the race there, of course. And then Austria, I mean, he did have a 5-second penalty, but he might be able to get ahead of Verstappen, not crashed into him. Silverstone, if McLaren had handled the strategy better, he could have won.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on it there for a second, that about Piastri being in consideration for the number 1 driver. I think he's done more than enough this season to warrant that argument. And also, if McLaren end this season having won the Constructors' Championship, which I think is a very likely possibility, then you would say that Piastri has been the difference. He's been the main effect. We all know that Norris and Verstappen are world-class talents, and we knew that Verstappen was always going to be on it, and he was going to always get the maximum out of that car. And but with the second drivers, if you can even call Piastri a second driver now, he's exceeded when Perez hasn't, and again, even gone above and beyond what Norris has been capable of this season. So I think it's that revelation in Piastri that has ultimately meant that McLaren can even call themselves as fighting for this Constructors' Championship. He's done such an amazing job this season, and I think he's definitely going to be in consideration for being on equal terms with Norris next season, and maybe even the second half of this season as well.
Yeah, and obviously we'll have to wait and see whether that happens, and see what happens with the McLarens over the next few races. I think that brings us to the end of the Belgian Grand Prix review. Very, very entertaining race, lots to talk about. So we'll move on to our predictions now. So we obviously made predictions for the Belgian Grand Prix. Myself, Chime, who was here last week but couldn't join us this week, and Callum substituting for Will Biddles. Callum, have you got these scores on the door at the moment?
Yes, I certainly do. Originally before this race, we had Chinmay leading on 84 points. We had Will Biddles on 82, and you, Will Kingswood, were on 79. But it has certainly switched up after this week. Shall I go? I mean, I'm happy to read out Chinmay's, as I believe he was first last week. Is that correct?
I think so. I think if it's normally whoever picked Verstappen tends to be first.
Well, it's been interesting this season. I mean, or recently, from that being switched up ultimately. But I think it was Chinmay first, and he did choose Verstappen. And unfortunately, he was fourth. He actually got the whole top 5 correct, but in completely the wrong order. He went with Verstappen, then Norris second. He then put Piastri as third, Hamilton fourth, and Leclerc fifth. So top 5 drivers right, but in the wrong order, so that's 5 points. And all of his predictions, his 1, 2, and 3 point predictions, were also incorrect. He said that there would be at least one safety car or red flag in the race. Unbelievably, we had no safety cars. There were no incidents whatsoever. He said a different fastest person in the quali session. I believe I'm right in saying that Verstappen got highest on 2 sessions. Is that right? I think it was Q2 and Q3.
I think it might have been all 3. Verstappen in quali was another level of kind of quick over the rest of the field.
Yeah, certainly. It's and obviously the only reason that we maybe got a good fight was because he was coming through from 11th place. And his 3-point prediction, rather audacious, was Perez losing his seat, which, to be honest, is probably quite likely after the result that we saw. But strangely, Red Bull, as we mentioned, have decided to keep him, so he loses that prediction as well. That is 5 points for Chime, which takes him up to 89. So, Will Kingswood, how did you do? Do you have your predictions with you?
Yes, I do, and it was me next. I was second, and the disqualification didn't only lose Mercedes points, but it also lost me points. I also got with that disqualification, I also got all of the top 5 correct, but again, in the wrong order. So I went for Norris P1, he was P5. In the end, I went for Hamilton P2. Obviously, did finish on the road P2, but with the disqualification was bumped up to first. I went for Verstappen P3, but he finished P4. Piastri P4, but then obviously finished P2 after Russell was disqualified, and Leclerc P. I went for P5, but did round out the podium. So 5 points there as well. My 1, 2, and 3 point predictions, pretty close, but only got 1 out of the 3. So my 1 point prediction was the one I got right. I said McLaren would outscore Red Bull, which they did. I then went for my 2 point prediction, a surprise driver in the top 5 for qualifying. Unfortunately, I did specify that Perez was not a surprise, and other than that, it was fairly standard. So no 2 point prediction there. And then my 3 point prediction, I went for 2 Eau Rouge / Blanchimont overtakes, and as far as I'm aware, there was only 1 at Blanchimont. It was Russell, I think, overtaking Hulkenberg.
Yes, I believe so too. I think that's right. So that is
That should be
6 points for you,
yeah.
which takes you up to 85. And then finally, it goes down as Will Biddle's points, but I think I did choose as Will Biddle's couldn't unfortunately join us last weekend, but nevertheless, I think quite a fairly decent weekend. So I got 4 of the correct top 5. I did put Russell in P5, but obviously he was disqualified. But apart from that, I went with Piastri first. He was in second. Verstappen, I went with P2. I thought he was in fourth. He actually did finish in fourth. Norris was in P3, and ultimately he finished fifth. And I put Hamilton P4, and he won the race in the end. So that's 4 points from that. And then for my 1 point prediction, I said that a driver would come off the track at Eau Rouge at some point in the weekend, and that was, at least one of them was Stroll in, was it third practice, I believe?
Yep. Yeah. FP3.
Yeah, in third practice. Then my 2 point prediction is I said that there would be some sort of engine-related retirement in the race, and I believe that was Joe Granu.
Yes, I think that was engine related. I'm willing to give the points.
Yeah. So that was some kind of problem with his car. And my 3 point prediction was I thought less than 15 drivers were going to finish the race, but as the fact that there were no safety cars in the race, we certainly got very little chaos in the way of crashing, as hopefully as I might have hoped for in that prediction. So that is 7 points for Will Biddles, which brings him equal to Chinmay on 89 points. So the scores after that race are 89 points for Chinmay and Will Biddles, and then you, Will Kingswood, are just behind on 85, but still very close.
Yep, still pretty close to go, and obviously got quite a few races left. So yeah, that's brought us to the end of the show. We'll be back in a few weeks, obviously looking forward to the next race at Zandvoort. But for now,